Hi, you guys. Welcome back. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio. Thanks for spending the time with us. I appreciate it. Got another fun show tonight with a friend of ours from South Carolina named Lieutenant Colonel, to be correct, Lieutenant Colonel retired Ray Moore, who has an incredible background and was, I was fortunate to meet him thanks to Alex Newman. And Alex Newman is involved in lots of projects, and one of those is Public School Exit. And I thought that sounds incredibly valuable, considering the physical and non-physical things that they're subjecting children to now in the public schools and some of the private ones too. And alternatives are needed, for anybody that wants to save their small kids from being victimized by things that are getting, at the moment, worse, and parents need to be really aware of them. But Ray's been involved in a lot of other things. He's a retired military chaplain and pioneer in homeschooling, which is about the alternative to public schools, and the director and founder of something called Exodus Mandate that we're going to find out about, chairman of Public School Exit. I'm looking down because I don't want to miss anything on the list that I put together here. In the words of his bio, the nation's leading advocate of a mass exodus of Christian children from the government schools. And I would add that we don't want to leave the non-Christian kids out either. They deserve to be rescued also. So hopefully it's for everybody. And he's also produced a film, Escaping Common Core, which is a really good thing to escape from, and is the executive producer of something called Indoctrination. So we have, if we're quick, we have at least 10 hours of stuff to talk about. We may have to invite him back again, but we'll start on Public School Exit. And thanks for the privilege of meeting you, Ray. I really appreciate it very much.
Thank you. And I work pretty routinely with Alex Newman. We probably talk once or twice a week.
Okay.
So yeah, we're in the same, in the same category.
Yeah, we've had a lot of great discussions on the air with Alex. He's getting overwhelmingly busy now, but we had a show with him recently, and I said, Public School Exit, that sounds really important. And he says, you should talk to Ray Moore. And I said, I hope I can. And you were nice enough to let us do that. So maybe just to introduce you, as a person to the audience, why don't you go back in time a little bit before you got interested in all this stuff and give us some background of what led up to all these projects.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity, Richard, and Doug too. And I'm happy to be visiting with your committed audience and congregation. Right. I've been married 51 years, soon to be 52, and we have 4 adult children and 8 grandchildren. And we were a pioneer homeschool family in the modern era. We started in 1977 when I was finishing up my theological seminary training in Indiana at Grace Seminary. And we had moved from the campus to Purdue University, near Purdue, to start a new campus ministry. And that kind of was prompting what we were going to do with our oldest child, because he was ready to go to school. Mm-hmm. And that was in 1977. And for some of the same reasons that people refuse to public school their kids today, those were factors in our thinking. But our theology and philosophy was not really fully formed at that time. But we started homeschooling rather than put him in a public school.
And he was around 5 years old or so?
No, 6 years old.
6, okay.
And he's 50 now.
Okay, all right.
And got 4 children of his own.
He got older.
Yeah. So anyway, that was our beginning. And there was very little writing. There were no books on homeschooling. It was really a non-existent entity almost at that time. But when you go back and look at history, it was not a non-entity. So we didn't have any book we could read at that time. But there was an important book by Edersheim. He was a famous Jewish Christian theologian in the 19th century. And he wrote a book called Sketches of Jewish social life. And he just looked at the Jewish people and how they behaved and what they did in the New Testament era.
Okay.
And sure enough, there was a chapter in there about the education system. And apparently Jesus was homeschooled, according to Edersheim, up to maybe puberty. And then he went to the synagogue school.
Uh-huh.
So we said, well, if Jesus could do it, maybe our son could. And that was about the only thing we had. We did feel God was leading us, but it was pretty daunting because people thought we had flipped out. And we weren't sure ourselves we hadn't flipped out.
Right.
But we proceeded on, and we saw that it worked so well with our son. And so we ended up homeschooling all four of the children over the next 15 or 20 years, usually up through the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. And then we tended to put them in a private or Christian school through the rest of their careers.
Okay.
So that went on for a long time. And then in 1997, I captured the moment of the vision of organizing a national crusade for churches and Christian families in particular to do this as a way of life. Now, you mentioned we are concerned about non-Christians as well, but, you know, since I'm a minister, you know, I can appeal basically to Christians that, you know, I can give them the Bible and tell them, you know, that sort of thing. But, you know, we hope atheists will do it. And you don't have to be a Christian to love your kids, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Everybody deserves to be rescued. But I wanted to ask you a couple of quick things without losing your train of thought, just as we go along here.
Sure.
One of them is, well, two questions. One is what state you were in, and if that changed during, you know, raising your kids, and if you had any resistance from the state like you would, you know, have to
real
deal
good
with now.
question. Yeah, in fact, we did. We were in Indiana.
Oh, okay.
Of course, it was such a new thing at that time. There were no laws on it, and it was not unregulated because it was new.
Yeah.
And, now we don't know for sure, but we could have easily been among the first couple of hundred families in the nation in the modern era. And we most people date the birth of the homeschool movement in 1980, and we didn't even know another family until 1981 that was doing what we were doing. But yes, we started doing it, and I forget what exactly happened, how this happened, but the State Department of Education found out about it, and they called me out of the blue. We were sort of underground. You know, the kids didn't go out in the daytime, and we didn't go ask for permission. We just did it.
Yeah.
So they called me and want to know what I was doing, and they knew we were we didn't even call it homeschooling in those days, and I guess they were asking me to, you know, get permission or something. I can't remember what exactly. It's been a long time since I had the conversation.
Okay.
So they asked me if I would help them, the State Department of Education, to create a homeschool permission form where they would put it out to families that were homeschooling and, you know, to get permission. And I said, well, I might be willing to help you do a homeschool notification form, but I wouldn't be able to help you do a permission form because it's not yours to give. It's my right as a parent. You can't give me permission because you don't have the authority to do it. And I said, you can't restrict us or limit us or stop us. I may be embellishing a little bit.
Yeah.
You can't show that we're doing harm to our children. And, you know, they never called back. That was the end of it.
Yeah, they were only interested in the permission part.
They wanted permission. They wanted me to ask for permission. And I said I wasn't going to ask for permission.
That was a great answer. And it makes me wonder, too, as things have evolved. You said you normally have kids homeschooled up to a certain age, and then you put them in a private or Christian school.
That was our practice.
Well, right, at the time that you were doing your own kids. But as things have evolved now, decades later, would you still put them into a school, or would you keep them in homeschooling?
I can't really answer because it's, you know, we were so on the front edge But today we see so many families that homeschool all the way through the 12th grade do exceptionally well. These children are exceptional. So what happens when you get to middle school, it becomes more daunting as far as advanced math, calculus, labs, those things loom large. But homeschool families are doing it. They're doing calculus and labs and and we had a room in the house, a special room, just the school room. And we never had more than 2 or 3 students at a time, really actually 2, because the kids were spaced so that by the time the third child came along, the oldest had graduated.
Okay.
So, but we had the school room, and they went to school about 9 in the morning and worked up till 2 or 3, and then they were done. And they didn't do a lot of homework because they did it during school. You can compact into a day of homeschooling, get more done than a teacher with 20 or 30 kids can do in a school, because she has to spend so much time on keeping order and discipline.
Yeah.
And the homeschool. So homeschooling just, it's incredibly successful as a learning experience for children.
Well, I noticed when you meet kids that are homeschooled, they don't seem like the same kind of human being. I mean, that's just been my impression.
No, and now, of course, we do have I had an old seminary professor who used to say, where there's light, there's bugs. So we do have some bugs, but generally speaking, they're just extraordinary children and do well. You can't create utopia anywhere, even in the church.
Right.
But you haven't been in an argument. Do you get in an argument with your brothers in Christ?
That's great. I didn't notice that they were perfect or anything, but I did notice that they seemed less oppressed.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah,
they really, in so many cases, they're like little adults. They look you in the eye and they shake hands and they enter into adult conversations, and it's really amazing, and they're really educated too. Our oldest son was exceptional. He ended up finishing college in '93, and he was one of the early, probably, I can't know, there was nobody keeping count, but he finished college in '93, so he had to be one of the early homeschool kids to go through. Now, he wasn't homeschooled through the 12th grade, but he was valedictorian of his college class and was a cadet colonel and regimental commander of the Corps Cadets. He went to the Citadel Military College of South Carolina. And he had a combination of awards there that's only happened 4 times in the history of the school.
You were at that school too, right?
Yeah, I went
earlier.
Yeah, I finished much, much earlier.
So, okay, I'm sorry I interrupted. I just wanted to, bring out those answers.
Yeah, the stories of it are important. We're not dealing theoretical. These are real people. Yeah. Real families, real students, real children. And so so people need to know that it does work.
So when you finished with your own kids, was it before that you started getting ideas for more connected projects, or was it after?
Well, good question. Actually, I think from 77 to 97 was 20 years in there. Mm-hmm. And we had done it, and it was so successful with our children that I began to think, it would be good if everybody did this.
Right.
And so in 1997, I launched officially the Exodus Mandate Project. Prior to that, I had been advocating it strictly in the state of South Carolina. I wrote this little pamphlet. It's a kind of a sermon, but it's really an outline of a strategy.
97, you said?
1997 is when I went public with the Exodus Mandate Project.
Okay, and what is it?
Well, this is my outline of my strategy.
Okay.
I'm holding it up. And I published this in 95 in a small conservative Christian newspaper in Greenville, South Carolina. And I go back today and look at it and reread it. It was originally published in 1995, and I kind of marvel and how I felt like I had been inspired with this outline of this strategy or this vision of what to do and how to do it. And when I read it now, 25 years later, I don't feel much of a need to make any adjustments. Everything we've done since 1995 is really an expansion of this idea, of this little pamphlet. And so what happened and what really prompted me to go national and public was in 1997, I went to the big briefing in Washington, D.C. with Henry Hyde and Phyllis Schlafly chairing it. And it was complaining about the public education system in America, K-12 public education at that time. And so the speakers all were looking at the crisis in public education. And these were well-known people, mostly Republicans and conservatives. Mm-hmm. And I listened. It lasted all day. There were about 800 people in the audience. About half of them were staff people with congressmen and senators, and Heritage Foundation, Homeschool Legal Defense, Family Research Council, Focus on the Family, all the so-called conservative and Christian right groups were sponsoring it. And I sat there today all day, and I literally had a wow moment. You know what a wow moment is?
Yeah, but you can describe it.
Well, it's like an epiphany, and I'm gonna kind of give you a facial expression. I went like, "Wow!"
Yeah.
These people don't have a clue what to do. And I said to myself, the left have been working education since Horace Mann and John Dewey, mm-hmm. and they've got a plan. And here we are, nobody here's got a plan for what to do. And I was stunned by it. And these were a lot of people that I looked up to. And I saw them as my betters or superiors, but they didn't have a clue about what to do. I've been in the conservative movement since high school, and it's really a reactionary movement. And sometimes you've got to react. Bad things that happen, you've got to be reactionary. So
they did have a clue about the problem, just not.
They knew the problem, but they didn't know what to do about it, how to solve it.
Right.
And they're not proactive people. They're always just whining and complaining and everything. And I walked out of there that day, and I guess I would say God tapped me on the shoulder. And I said, and I had already been thinking it for 2 years with this. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, God helping me, I'm going to launch a crusade and get millions of children out of these awful, terrible communist schools.
Right.
And that's what I did. And so I launched it publicly in November of 1997. And it was first few years, it was pretty hard. I got nothing but criticism. I couldn't get any support. My wife supported me and two other friends who gave me some funds. They supported me financially, but even they weren't sure about it. They said, Ray, I don't know. That seems awful controversial to me. And, I forged ahead.
Since people haven't read that little folder, you should tell us what the elements are in there, because that's what you're building on, right?
I'll be happy to make it available to you and mail it to you. But
I think that would be great. Yeah.
I called it an answer to the crisis in education that faces the Christian church in America today. Now, again, I may sound like I'm being too parochial to just talking about Christians, because it's a bigger problem than that. But that's the world I live in. And so I have, No, all right. So in the title of it is Let My Children Go. And
that's
so
great.
We're saying, not my people go. Moses said, let my people go. We're saying, let my children go.
This is a bit more specific.
And so we use the term, the four main points. That kind of introduction talks about the crisis that we have. And it was then, and it really is even worse today. And I complained about the lack of the pastors being involved. I'm a pastor. I've been in the ministry 45 years formally, and I wrote this to wake up the pastors.
Okay.
It's terrible to have to tell you that most of them are laggards on this. And so anyway, the 4 points are, the first point is God's providential timing. The doctrine of providence means that God is working in history and unseen by man. Man can see what's happening, but he can't see the hand of God in the background. And in God's timing, it's time to leave. And I use the children of Israel, and down in Babylon, down in Egypt as an example. They were sent down there by God after 400 years. He said, okay, it's enough. It's time to go back to your land of Canaan. So I make that a comparison. And if you remember, they didn't want to leave. They were happy down there, even though they were slaves.
They were used to it.
They were getting they were eating three square meals a day.
Yeah.
And Pharaoh didn't want them to leave. He needed the slaves. And Moses didn't want to lead them.
Yeah.
But they left because it was God's time.
Right.
And so that's the first point. And the second point is warnings from the past. It's shocking to see how many famous theologians and leaders were warning the churches in the last 2 centuries not to adopt state-sponsored education. We are opposed to the state running the schools. We don't want them running medicine either, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
Anything that the government touches, they usually spoil it. I think they have limited responsibilities, law enforcement, military, but pretty much everything else belongs to the people. And we have a constitution that tells us that.
Well, they're supposed to be protecting your individual rights so that they don't get lost.
Yeah. But anyway, so the warnings from the past tell us not to do this, but we did it anyway. We didn't listen.
Right.
And I quoted a few famous theologians. I won't read those, and then the third point was all education is at some level fundamentally religious. There's no such thing pure in God's mind of a pure, total, secular, sacred separation. Yeah, that's not biblical. So we say that education is religious, and the public schools are very religious. They're pagan, secular, and humanistic, and anti-Christian in practice and design. And then the fourth one is education belongs to the family, supported by the church or private associations, and not to the state. We don't think the state has a role in K-12 education, even higher education. Now, they've usurped it and taken it over, and they own it, but it doesn't really belong to them. It belongs to private citizens, churches, and families. Yeah. So those are the 4 points, and I have lived by those for 25 years.
Yeah, they're good points, and they seem to be included in the natural rights that are referred to in the founding documents of the country. Right.
We believe in the natural law. Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, if you look at the constitutional, when the first Congress met in 1791, there was no Bill of Rights, and that was the first thing they took up. Let me see. I wish I had that in front of me. It's a great quote. But they were arguing whether there should be a national education policy or not. Mm-hmm. And of course, they decided no, there will not be. And James Madison, who is considered the father of the Constitution, had more to do with it than any other single person. He makes a statement. It was a debate over the General Welfare Clause, but he said, were the government to take up this responsibility of educating the children, meaning we're not going to, it would mitigate and transmute or damage or harm. That was another interpretation of the word transmute, the very form of limited government we're seeking to create here. So he said if we were to take up an education policy at the national level, we would destroy the very form of government we're creating. And that's exactly what's happening.
That's true. And education is not in the enumerated powers allotted to the federal government. So,
because we are absolutely opposed to the federal Department of Education.
I was just going to say there's no basis for that existing, really.
But we are also opposed to the State Department of Education, and we're opposed to the County Board of Education.
Yeah.
We don't want education being run by the government at any level.
Problem is that the U.S. Constitution doesn't stop the state, county, or anybody else like that from doing things that are not good.
Yeah, you're right, and but yeah, we believe that. So that's a good point. But they didn't. They left it to the states or to the people.
So how are the state constitutions generally about that point? Do you know?
Well, I should have a good ready answer for that. But generally speaking, they didn't have state education. For the first 220 years of American history, we had no state-sponsored, tax-subsidized, state-run public schools anywhere in America. And most people do not know that. It's pretty shocking to hear it the first time. Yeah. It was started in 1840s in Boston with Horace Mann. And even he, as bad as he was, he allowed religious sentiment and some religious practices to be expressed in the schools. But Dewey came along in around the 1900, and he was the father of progressive education. So we had no state-run public schools. Now in New England, there was a little different model than in the South. I'm from the South, but in New England, they had community schools, which were run by the churches, but they were joint community church schools. So they were more like our private Christian schools today. They had catechism and everything that a Christian school would have. Uh-huh. And there was a joining together of the county and the church. And I do have a Baptist tradition, and I do believe in a separation of church and state. Now, by that, I'm talking about a jurisdictional separation where the church does not officially interfere with the government, and the government has nothing to say to the church.
Right.
And I think that's the ideal model. And we came from Europe, and around with the Pilgrims and all, and they had state churches there. And the state pays the salaries of the clergy, and that's a terrible thing. If you're being paid by the government, then they're going to pull your chain and tell you what to preach and teach. And so we set up a different model in the United States, and that's a distinctive thing that the American model gave. And but in the South, there was no community involvement. All the schools were academies and church schools. Now get this, after the Civil War, when the South had lost, to come back into the Union, they had to put provisions in that they would offer a tax-subsidized school system in their states. And that was the beginning of that period. It was, in about the 1870s. And so this thing has evolved to where it is today. And I finished high school in 1961. Mm-hmm. And we still had chapel once a month in the school. Wow. In homeroom, we had prayer and Bible reading every day. It wasn't a truly explicit Christian school, but it was respectful of Christianity.
Boy, that's really changed. Huh?
62 and 63 were the famous prayer and Bible reading decisions, and we were officially expelled in every way in practice and precept. Well, Christians are not allowed to live a double life. We don't have a secular life and a sacred life. Our lives are to be sacred at all times. So right. We've allowed that model to come into the church, and Baptists are the worst of all, putting their kids in public school. So I've tried to correct that, and I've struggled. I've been doing it nearly 25 years, mm-hmm. and we were making a lot of success, having a lot of success, but with COVID, the shutdown, it just opened up doors, opportunities for our movement that are unprecedented. I'm living in what we call a Kairos Moment. That's a second Greek word for time, uh-huh. And it means opportune time or divine time. And we're living in a once in 100-year moment for the growth of private, Christian, and homeschooling. It's extraordinary moment.
Is that because it's online, so it's less limited?
Well, it's because, here's what I think has happened. Prior to this, and this is what Public School Exit does, and we want to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Prior to March of last year, I guess that's when the shutdown took place.
Right.
There were about 2.5 to 2.7. It's uncertain the exact number. People homeschool children. Probably 70 to 80% are evangelical Christians, and then most are Catholics, and Jews, and there are secular people that do it.
What's the 2.7? Is that a number or percentage?
2.7 million. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That was that was a number before COVID. Well, then suddenly there were 55 million children at home overnight.
Yeah.
And most of them didn't want to be there. But what we found is that a lot of people were thinking about homeschooling, but they were fearful, lazy, inertia kept them from doing it, and they didn't like the public schools anyway, but they just wouldn't leave. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of joke about it. I say it's like God reached up one day and flipped a switch and sent everybody home. It was my greatest dream, but it was a nightmare for most people at the time.
Yeah.
And so now we're discovering, and there's research for this. I'm not the one that did it, that indicate that 10, 15, or 20% are never going to return. Now, it's uncertain, and we really won't know the final count until September when the schools reopen. So that's why I'm willing to go anywhere and talk to anybody like you and anybody. Yeah. I'm on all kinds of shows. Alex Newman is doing the same thing. He says we just have incredible opportunities to get this message out.
Right.
And we're hoping that it'll drive up to 20 or 25%. And
that don't go back, you mean?
That don't go back.
Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
So is Exodus Mandate, does that just refer to that initial proposal that you wrote, or has that become a program?
It's a ministry or an organization, and we've created movies, books. People will go there and look at it. Now it is more Christian oriented, but like I said, we're hope that everybody will do this. Mm-hmm. I've produced 2 movies, written 2 books. One's called Let My Children Go. And then I wrote a book with my wife on parenting small children, raising them in the Christian faith, called The Promise of Jonadab. And
that's not on my list, so I need to.
Yeah, okay. It's a book for parenting young children.
Promise of Jonadab?
Jonadab, yeah. He's a very obscure Old Testament character who was an exceptional father. And I started teaching and writing about it 25 years ago, and it had such a profound effect on me as a father that Gail and I kind of joked and said he came to live with us. Yeah. But he's very extraordinary, and if he was here today, Richard, he would, and Doug, he would not be a famous writer, preacher, politician. He would be your car mechanic. He would be the guy that fixes your house. He was an ordinary man, but the most extraordinary dad in the Bible.
So where can these 2 books be acquired?
Well, The Promise of Jonadab can be acquired from going to Exodus Mandate .org and ordering it. Now, we do need a donation. We don't charge for it, but we'd like to get $10 or $12.
Okay,
and then we'll send an autographed copy out.
Great.
And it's good for young dads that have children, say, pre-puberty. Mm-hmm. We kind of targeted that group, but it was a joint effort of me and my wife. We did it together. She actually wrote half the chapters, and she's a real writer, a professional wordsmith, and I'm not. I'm a good, decent writer, but she corrects my stuff. But she wrote some of the chapters and corrected for grammar, and she's a poet. So in the back of the book, we have it's a poem, but it's a ballad. It's like 4 pages about this guy, like Hiawatha almost. Is that good?
Wow.
And so we took this personality, this man in the Bible, and it was a biography of him, but we integrated our own parenting skills and the things that we did because we found out and we discovered him that we were actually copying him without knowing about him.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, and what about the other book, Let My Children Go?
That was a manifesto. Can I step up a minute and pull it off?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
It's Let My Children Go. Why parents must remove their children from public schools now. And this was published in, I think, 2001. The problem I have with it is it's good. It's just a bit out of date.
Okay.
And we're trying to go through a major revision in the rest of this year. And I'm down to 50 copies. So I'm really not, kind of.
You're not pushing it until you're finished with the revision
done. But it was kind of a manifesto or strategy. In some ways, it was this thing. This little pamphlet expanded to 250 pages.
Okay.
Yeah. 300 pages.
Revision is a big job. You got to go through the whole thing.
But the other book is available now, and it's been translated into Mandarin, and it's selling in China. The last I heard, the church in China is going through some real persecution.
Yeah.
We got it published in China, and with a Chinese publisher, and they were the third largest Christian publisher in China. Believe it or not, there are 6 or 8 of them.
Wow.
And they had bookstores and everything. So I just haven't been in touch with them in a year because the Chinese church, a lot of them are being arrested now.
Yeah, that's amazing that they're allowing them to sell the book over there.
Well, I think they are still.
Okay.
But it was available on Alibaba, which is their version of Amazon.
Yeah.
And so that's happening, and it's just recently been translated into Spanish, and I've got a person that's helping me publish, and it should be out, I think, in the next 2 to 3 months in Spanish.
Okay, great.
And the person is Hispanic, and Christianity is really growing all over Latin America, and she says that the Hispanic people really respect the family. And they have real good family life in many cases. And
I've seen that too.
And more than sometimes Anglos.
Mm-hmm.
She says there's no book quite like this in Spanish anywhere. And they do have books on parenting, but they're more how-to. But our book is a story about a man, and we weave within it the practical side of how to do it.
Okay.
We're really excited about this book. We have a goal. We have a prospect of it translated into Korean.
Okay.
And we're working on Portuguese, and I'm hoping the next 3 to 5 years it'll be in a dozen languages. It's a short little book that he's only mentioned in 2 chapters in the Bible, but boy, are they full. And so we made a story out of it, and people really like it.
Yeah, makes me want to read it for sure.
But it's short and sweet.
I also want to make sure we don't forget the 2 films that you did.
Okay.
And what those are about and where people can find those too.
They are available. The first one, the first one is the most important, and it's called Indoctrination. And I was the executive producer, but Colin Gunn and Joaquin Fernandez were film producers, and they produced it and directed it, but it's really my message. And so I put up half the funds for it.
Okay.
That did extremely well. It came out in 2011, and that year it won the San Antonio Independent Film Festival Award for the second best Christian movie of the year and the best documentary. Was
it sold in DVD format?
Yeah, it's in DVD. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And but if your audience wants to order that one, it would be good if they ordered directly from the producer. We have them in the office, but the best place to get it would be indoctrinationmovie.com.
Okay.
Indoctrinationmovie.com. Now, as far as I know, they're still making them available. It has kind of played out. I shouldn't put it that way. Played down, because it is 10 years old.
Yeah.
But it's still very up to date. And if I had a criticism of it, and it's not a bad one, it tends to focus almost only on homeschooling. and the two guys that did it were pretty much homeschooling or show you the road, and I pushed both private Christian and homeschooling.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But it was probably viewed by 3 to 5 million people, but it's kind of played down a little bit. But it's still very good. And then the one on Common Core.
Yeah.
Common Core was a big hot button issue when we came out with that. It was basically a secularization of all education, and well,
so, they did a few other things too, like teaching that 2 + 2 could equal whatever you want.
Yeah, right. And so it really was offensive to families at the time I came out with the movie. So that's why I used a negative issue to get people to leave. And
didn't they start changing history and stuff too?
Oh yeah. Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States is a Marxist interpretation of history. It has 2 million of those books were used in public schools. It's just wow. Things they're doing to the children in public schools. If they were doing it in the 60s, when I came through, we'd put half of them in jail.
Yeah.
It's become a criminal enterprise.
Absolutely, part of a big network of criminal enterprises.
And I know you're concerned about health issues, and well,
they go together.
One of the things that's causing homeschooling to grow in some places is they're trying to force, vaccinations on children, and parents just don't want it.
They are. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but in Canada, they're going to parks where, not now because they're saying you can't go out of your house, but when you could still go out of your house, which was a few days ago in most places, they were finding kids in parks, and they'd offer them free ice cream if they'd get a vaccine. And if the parents try to run in and object, the police were blocking the parents.
Hard to believe that. But I'm not surprised. But so in a few years ago in California, there was a heavy vaccination program, I think before COVID. And there were thousands of families pull their kids out in California.
Yeah.
So that's helping grow my movement, and because they've got to protect their children. And
sometimes it takes an issue like that's a threat, to do something good.
But so, health or medical freedom is a vital part of our heritage, and it's hard to imagine that they can force this on the culture and the public, but they're doing their best, and it's incredible to watch it.
The founders of the country
that's causing some growth, just us. But we do try as Christians to lay down a theological case, and we can show pretty clearly that the scriptures teach, with no exceptions, the Bible doesn't contradict itself, and there's dozens of texts in the Bible about parenting and education, and that it should be done by families and churches and private associations. There's no basis for state education if you take the Bible seriously, and I do.
Unless you think that the state owns the children.
Right, that's right. And we're under attack right now because Harvard had a symposium a few weeks ago, and some of the scholars are really worried about this because they know if they have the children in public schools, they can indoctrinate them and brainwash them and make them little slaves.
Yeah.
And but if they leave and go into homeschooling and Christian schooling, they might learn to think for themselves. And
that would be a major threat.
Yeah, and so the left actually sees it as a major threat. And they had a symposium, and there's a famous Harvard scholar, I think her name is Bartlett. I should have this in front of me. And she says instead of giving people the freedom to homeschool, the disposition or the assumption should be that they need to get permission. They might be able to do it, but they need to get, the assumption is that they should get permission from the government. Well, I don't believe that at all.
Right.
And our laws have never taken that position. The idea is that the state can't interfere if they can't show and prove that you're harming your children.
I don't think the government asked for permission to start the public schools, did they?
That's a good question. Well, we would like to get rid of that model.
Yeah.
And it's not impossible if we can grow this movement strong enough over time, it might happen. There's a statisticians, I think, and I don't know quite where this research came from, that if you get 10% of a group of public hardcore committed to an idea, that over time it will prevail in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, and he talks about the tipping point. So we're approaching 10-15%, and so we're winning. It's just going to be a protracted struggle. But I could see a day when, if we grew up to 25 or 30%, maybe 40, the politics would change. And then you got 35 to 40%, that's a high figure, who are completely out and against state education. And then you went over the majority of the rest of the people, or a good percentage, and everybody else wants out. So the government just says, look, it's not working. It's wasting money. We're going to hand it back to the churches and hand it back to the people where it was originally. And then comes a political, moral, ideological revival. The culture will change then. And we cannot win these battles we're in as long as we fight against the symptoms. So I realized that years ago, and I decided to go for the root cause, to pull up the root, the bad root.
And what's that?
Public school system.
Oh, you mean that cause of all this other stuff that comes from that, right?
If the kids, if they can't think,
yeah. Now, I think that the challenge to getting that done is that it's not being done just haphazardly. It's being done to destroy society.
Yeah.
And even if they're losing money, so to speak, what they've done to the money system is make it all fake anyway.
Yeah.
And so they have to be convinced at the top level of control to give up the program of wanting to destroy things.
But we've got to take their customers away, and we can.
Yeah, that would help a lot. Exactly.
So I do believe that if the politicians don't lead, they follow. You know, there's old saying: if the people will lead, the leaders will follow.
Yeah.
So if we can create enough demand for what we're doing and make it a strong majority, I think some of the politicians say, "Look, I want to get reelected. I'm going to vote for dismantling this school system."
Yeah,
that's how they think.
That would be incredible.
So it's not impossible. I had a friend that used to say, impossible things happen every day.
Yeah, exactly. Showing that we don't know what's impossible.
Yeah.
In fact, possibly nothing is impossible.
Yeah, they tell me, Ray, I had a lot of people say, they call me Don Quixote. You know, he jostled the windmills and thought he was in combat. And,
right.
You know, I mean, I've had people, I had one minister punch me in the chest. He didn't strike me, but he jabbed me and said what I was doing was wrong and I better stop. Well, I'm an old colonel in the Army, and you don't do that to me. So I got back in his face and barked at him like he was a private in the Army. We didn't strike any blows, but you know, we were like two prize fighters. You know.
Well, why was he so upset about it?
He buys into this salt and light idea that Christians are being salt and lighted in the public schools. That's absurd. That is the biggest thing that I face. This real shaky, weak, watery, anemic, sissified thinking about the Bible. The Bible doesn't teach you should put little children in pagan education.
So he thought that the kids who were coming from all these families would somehow improve the public school system.
That's what he thought, and that's been that, and that was, believe it or not, Richard, was a pretty strong view with a lot of pastors.
Wow.
We have done everything we can to discredit it. All the verses in the Bible that deal with education would be favoring me, except that one, but only because it's misinterpreted and abused. It's the most abused verse in the Bible.
Which one are you talking about?
That's Matthew 5:13 and 14. And that's where Jesus said, you should be salt and light, meaning that you should be preserving your culture and you should be light to the people around you.
That doesn't mean sacrificing your kids, though, right?
No, it doesn't. But that's how they interpret it. I call it the most abused verse in the Bible.
Wow.
And they took his words and twisted them.
Yeah.
Now, it does teach as Christians, we're obligated to be on good behavior because we're supposed to reflect the love of Jesus and represent him. So if we're on bad behavior, and we can be, Christians can do bad things too, it hurts him. It calls it, well, I don't want to be like old John Jones because he's such a bad representative for God.
Yeah.
And we've seen many of those.
I was going to ask you, with all the subjects that are taught in homeschooling, do you guys make recommendations about textbooks that you think are good for everybody?
We recommend curricula, and maybe we should roll into that. How much time do we have in this part of the show?
Well, we could take like another 15, 20 minutes if you want.
Let's talk about public school exit, because that's going to be the vehicle, the best vehicle that we're promoting.
Yeah, so some more detail on that would be good.
It's publicschoolexit.com, and I'm the chairman, and Alex is the director, executive director, Alex Newman, and Dran Reese is the CEO, and it's based in San Diego. And I'm the chairman because I kind of helped inspire them to do it, but they wanted to have another separate group on their own. And I was running Exodus Mandate on the East Coast, and they were on the West Coast. So I agreed to come on and be a board member. And it's turning out to be maybe the best overall program of many that's causing homeschooling and private and Christian schools to grow right now.
Okay.
Now, they have a lot of information about curricula, and frankly, Richard, it's almost too many. This world has grown so much that there's an abundance of good curricula for conservative people and Christian people. Alex is a teacher with Freedom Project Academy or Freedom Project Education.
Yeah.
And this booming too. And Duke Pesta is on our board, and he is the president or the chairman of that.
Yeah, he's great.
That's just one example. But you've got all kinds of others. We used, in our early days, we used Bob Jones and Abeka, and they've been around a long time. But we were so new that they wouldn't sell to us because they thought it was weird. And we had to go to a local Christian school to buy used textbooks so we could have books for our children. But they changed their policies around 1981 and started selling directly to homeschool families. And now it's probably the biggest part of their curricula is homeschool families. They're, like I said, 2.7 million, and now it's jumped to 5 or 6 million. And it's just... This is exploding. And it's almost, I told my wife the other night, I can't take any more good news. With all the bad things that are happening in the world, tragically in our little arena, our little part of the world, we're having good news right now.
Good. So this
public school exit, it has a lot of reasons to do it. It has curricula, models that, everything operates around models, and you've got university model schools. It's a form of homeschooling and campus Christian school mixed, where the kids are home 2 days a week, 3 days a week. They go to the church and have school, and the parents can never be absent. In other words, a lot of people put their kids in a private Christian school, and they just drop them off, and it's almost like the public school, even though the program is much, much better. But this model, university model schools, and there are dozens of those around the country, the parents have to participate, but for the older and more advanced courses, they have teachers. That's one, and we have that one on there. And then you've got the one-room schoolhouse model. You might write that, one-room schoolhouse model.
Yeah, I do like that.
And let's see. Yeah, I think that's the title. One Room Schoolhouse. And they're based in Idaho, but they're growing around the country. And the rationale behind that was that the early Americans, they had one-room schoolhouses. And by the way, the Little House on the Prairie was not a public school. It was a one-room schoolhouse where the families would hire a teacher to come out from the east.
Yeah.
It wasn't a public school. It was paid for by the families. And it was a one-room schoolhouse. So that model is growing. So we have these different ones on our webpage, so people can. And the problem, the webpage is so full that if you're a dabbler, you don't want to go to that webpage. It makes you jump in and spend hours studying and meditating and praying and consulting. What am I going to do? Which one of these am I going to use?
Right.
And then we have a consulting service with that, so they can call up and somebody says, well, I'm ready to do it, but I'm just afraid.
Yeah, that's good.
And we can talk you through the early steps, and we've got consultants. So that's publicschoolexit.com, and I urge your audience to look at that one for more of how to, what to do, curricula, models, those kinds of issues. Now, Exodus Mandate is my webpage, and it's mostly about my ministry, the books I've written, the videos. And it's a good web page, but not as full and complete. Dran Reese has a wonderful staff, about 4 or 5 employees, and I've only got 3 on the staff. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of deferring. I'm pushing both of these because I actually need people to come to my web page if they want to help me financially or buy a book or get a movie.
Right.
Some of the same things would be on Public School Exit. And the good news, Richard, is that we're reaching into Canada. There's a Canadian group wants to affiliate with us, perhaps. It's still undecided. Wow. We've picked up an affiliate in the state of Illinois, a big group there that's decided to adopt our agenda, and they've got a bigger budget than we do, and they make 4 or 5 employees.
Good.
They hired a person recently just to go out and help churches start schools. We're in the process of working in an affiliate in the state of Georgia, in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And this is a man who's been doing this for 30 years on his own, started a school, he's got a ministry, and he saw what we were doing and wants to join us. So we're trying to go through the 50 states and pick up affiliates and not recreate the wheel.
Exactly.
And so Public School Exit is really got incredible potential. And I Exodus Mandate, we were kind of the first one out of the block. I think I was probably among the first in the modern era to call for an exodus. You know, a lot of people were working in the Christian school or homeschool world, but they didn't tell everybody else to leave. But we knocked the doors of the church down and said, get out of there, get out of these schools and come join us on the exodus. And we were kind of unique with doing that.
So if you wanted to clarify the difference in the focus between the 2 websites, Public School Exit and Exodus Mandate, how would you explain that to people who are...
Public School Exit has got more information about how to get started, what the models are, a good list of reasons. There's a consultant service, and it overlaps with the Exodus Mandate. I have some of those things, but, you know, if I was getting a dozen calls a day how to start a school, I couldn't process them.
Right.
So ours is a little, we're trying to look at, maybe we might make ours a little bit more like a think tank in the future. I've got sermons and articles and books, and mine is more informational, I guess you might say. And but they complement one another, and and I don't have the budget that Public School Exit has, and Dran and Alex wanted to have, you know, their own separate program, which was like Exodus Mandate. Mm-hmm. And I saw decades ago when I started this, if I had $300 million on my own, mm-hmm. I would not have enough money and enough resources to make this happen. So I always felt like I was going to plant seeds like Johnny Appleseed, you know, and people would pick up the mission and the dream that I had and run with it. And now I'm finding it's all over the country, all over the world. And I'm finding that a lot of people were inspired by something I said 20 years ago.
Wow, that's nice.
So I'm 77. I'm a happy man.
Let me ask you something about the general focus of the curriculum. Kids are learning how things are supposed to be normally and going through a healthy succession of learning different subjects.
Yeah.
At what, we've got some pretty serious issues going on in the world around us, which the kids eventually, start to understand because they're going to be dealing with the things that are happening in the outside world, which has a little bit different focus than their people in school. And at what age and what point in the whole program do they start looking really at, the things in the outside world that need to be fixed?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I think the curricula does prepare them.
Okay.
They're not head in the sand, not like an ostrich. We prepare them for life. We don't avoid controversial issues. Obviously, we wouldn't teach transgender.
They've already got that in the public schools anyway.
We wouldn't teach that, but we might allude to it and say this is what the others are doing. But of course, God says that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and a man is not a woman and a woman is not a man. It's got to be the most fundamental, basic thing in the universe. That
used to be kind of self-evident.
Yeah, but now people are questioning it. It's kind of amazing to see how the left has gone so crazy. So we don't ignore those things, but I will say sometimes homeschoolers might be sometimes a little bit naive, but that's not bad to keep them being naive. The scripture says that you should be innocent concerning evil, particularly in a young age.
Right.
You don't teach them, you don't corrupt their minds, you let their innocence take them a long way. But when they get about puberty or teenagers, they've got to learn the facts of life.
Yeah, I was just personally curious at what age you guys start dealing with, what's going on in the outside world.
Yeah, well, there's so many, I can't be too specific, but they're good programs. We teach history, science, math, all those things are taught. And, part of the reason you homeschool is to keep your child, in innocence, until the knowledge of things that are happening in the world, they're old enough to handle it and deal with it.
You've got a foundation, right?
Yeah.
And within the U.S., one thing that's been eliminated from the public school curricula for a long time is most of American history, government, and how the republic was put together and things like that. Yeah. I would imagine you're teaching some of those things again, right?
Yeah, we don't use Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. It's a Marxist book.
Right.
And no Christian school would use that if they understood. But the curriculum world is extraordinary. And there's so much competition, and it's friendly. The whole idea of a state model for education, one size fits all. Think about if when the automobile was invented, say around 1900, and people said, man, this is a wonderful invention. We're going to have to let the government take control of it so we'll have plenty of it. Well, we had one car, one model. There would have been no competition, and it would have never run well. And but Henry Ford said, I'm going to use the free market capitalist system, and I'm going to give every poor man in America a car to drive.
Yeah, that was incredible.
And so it should work like that. Or let's say we lived in food districts, not school districts, and you lived in one county, and you could only eat off the menu in that county, and you couldn't cross the county line to eat at another restaurant. And the teachers all had to be food handlers. The food handlers all be like the teachers. They had to be certified. What kind of health would we have? I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done to education. It's the worst. If we had free market education, it would be the best thing And I think we have a socialistic model of education. That's what public education is.
Yeah.
Socialism, by definition, is the state ownership of services and means of production. And it's the worst place to have socialism. I'd rather have socialism in food than in education, because it permeates all the culture. And you'll find conservatives that will fight healthcare, socialism and healthcare and every other thing, but they will defend the public school system, which is contrary to free market ideas.
Yeah, I think most of them haven't really thought it through.
Yeah.
But the other thing that they deal with, which the kids deal with, and really affects the relationship between kids and parents,
Yeah.
is that kids right now are getting most of their education from the television and from video games and things like that.
Yeah. Right.
So you have to kind of insulate the kids and make them somehow safe from the influence of the TV coming in, right?
There's a lot of groups out there, and I'd urge your audience to go to publicschoolexit.com to get a full range of what's available. And we're getting thousands of hits on that and visits. But they need to be prepared. They need to be serious people. We don't, no dabblers are wanted or desired. You're going to have to be serious. And then come to my webpage, Exodus Mandate, for my books and tapes and articles. And of course, if they want to make a donation, we'll accept that too.
And the movies are there at your site.
They can order the movies. Now, I gave an alternative site for Indoctrination, and that's still a very, very good movie, indoctrinationmovie.com.
Right. And
you'll order it right from the producer.
Okay.
Because I have to order them from him when I need them.
I see. Okay. So either way works. It seems like the one of the most important things is that in the middle of this otherwise really threatening situation with the lockdowns and people's businesses being destroyed and being locked in their homes and everything.
Yeah.
This is kind of a silver lining that most people haven't thought about.
Right. Yeah. That's what we actually use that term to describe it. Silver lining in a dark cloud. Yeah.
Yeah. And it might actually let families get to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah.
With the kids not gone all day.
Yeah. I never thought I'd live to see it. And, I just knew that I was putting things in motion. And the other thing is we've got so much talent in the movie, young talent. Alex Newman is extraordinary. He's our star.
Yeah.
And brilliant, high IQ, photographic memory, great writer, great speaker. And I'm looking at this next team coming along, and he's not the only one. There's a lot like him, his age or even a little older. He's kind of young. He's, I think, 35.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I mean, he's got the maturity of a 50-year-old man or a 60-year-old man.
More than most of those, actually.
Yeah.
So what do you see the next stages being?
Well,
where's it going?
Right now, we're pushing hard to get on many programs as we can, like yours.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that people will make that decision before September to stay home. And we're giving them, they can get the tools they need by Public School Exit and secondarily exodusmandate.org.
Yeah.
And start their own school. Get their pastor going and starting a school in the church. And if they write me, I'll send this one.
Okay.
Taking cover. We found that only about 10% of them, like I'm a pastor, but about 10% are very aggressive on this, with about 20 to 25% moderately supportive. By that, they put their kids in a Christian or private school or homeschool, but they're a little reluctant to preach and teach on it.
That's the percentage of parents you're talking about?
No, pastors.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm embarrassed to have to tell you that number.
No, that's okay.
They're the God-ordained leaders of the flock, but they're not leading right now.
Yeah.
But the good news is since COVID, there's been an awakening among them, and a lot of them are seizing the moment. You know, that Latin phrase, carpe diem, seize the moment.
Yeah.
And we're in a point where even I quote a Bible verse. Jesus made a comment in John 9:4. He said, I must do the works of him, meaning his Father who sent me. I must do the works of him who sent me for the night comes when no man can work. And so there's a timing in history and in the affairs of men. You know the quote from Shakespeare, there's a tide in the affairs of men.
Yeah.
That taken on the flood leans on to fortune. But omitted, all the life is spent in miseries in the shallows. So we're in one of those moments for people in the church and the culture.
Yeah.
Seize a moment and move forward with this and not hold back.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you're mentioning September, but it's very possible that based on what they're trying to do, they may say, "Oh yeah, you can come back in September as long as you have all the vaccines."
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, but that's helping. I mean, that's causing a lot of people to stay home.
Right.
Well, why September is important in theology. In life, you don't have to be a Christian. If you make a bad decision, in any area, you included, me included, we tend to defend it and justify it, and we harden in a bad decision. And so if people decide, well, I was going to homeschool, but I decided not to, so then they go back to public schools, they have a likelihood to defend it. It's going to be harder to dislodge them.
Right.
But we'll keep on. But we're hoping, Richard and Doug, that we could drive our numbers up to 15 or 20%. If that were to happen before September, that would be enormous.
Right.
Because then we'd have a large body of people. Because people who stay home and educate their kids, after a few years, they say, man, this is really good. It works. Why aren't you doing it?
Yeah.
And they go after people, for harming their children.
So
you're harming your children if you put them in a public school.
We should post your two websites and keep them up on our website.
Yeah, I'd be honored if you'd do that.
Yeah.
It's exodusmandate.org.
Right.
.org and publicschoolexit.com.
Right.
And I'm involved with both of them.
I would think we can make some kind of a banner and just keep those up all the time.
Yeah, that would be very wonderful.
Yeah. Out of all this discussion, since we started, which went by pretty fast.
Okay.
What do you want people to keep in the front of their mind besides the websites to go to?
Well, this might be the moment to do it, because if you save your children from state education, which is harming them, you may save your family and your marriage. And if you save your family and marriage, you may save your church, and you may save your neighborhood and your country. So it's not just a private decision. It's not just you and your kids.
Right.
It's about everybody, and it's about the culture. And we've got to win over our neighbors. And the best way to do it is to start homeschooling your kids and then reach out. So it's a vision for revival and renewal of family, church, and culture, or family, church, and nation. This is a strategy to win. I'll tell you a quick story in wrapping this up.
Yeah.
We've got a donor out in the West Coast in Seattle area, and a homeschool family, and her grandkids are being homeschooled. They're about my age, and I think in their late 60s, early 70s, and they're very faithful, wonderful people.
Okay.
And when the school shut down and everybody was home, her little 11-year-old granddaughter said, Grandmommy, is this the revival that we've been praying for?
That's great. And so you want to be able to answer yes and make sure it's true.
Is this the revival? Because we see our country dying. Yeah. And this country is in such bad shape. But this is the key to winning.
Well, the kids become the country, right?
Yeah, right.
So, well, there was one other thing, just really quick. I want that to be the end focus, but one other thing that I did want to ask you. When the kids that have been going to public school, especially the young ones now, even really young ages, are living in virtual reality, and the schools are helping them get this habit of hardly paying attention to the outside world at all, but living in a screen of a device. Is there a general principle of how you can reverse that?
Huh. Um, all I can say is that a lot of the homeschool families are not masking. They're carrying on pretty much as they would have before.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of social interaction in the homeschool movement. In most places now, they have athletic teams, baseball, football. Some cases they're allowed to participate in private and Christian schools, even though they homeschool. So they don't isolate.
Yeah.
But they're engaged, and so that's about all I can say there.
Yeah, well, the private sport idea is really great. And I know there was one famous coach for a track team of high school, and he didn't want to make his kids pass out running track wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And so they fired him, because of unacceptable point of view. And he has some donors, and he's starting a league of private track meets and things that'll all be without masks. It's an example of what you're talking about.
So there's a lot of creativity here.
Right.
And here in Columbia, where I live, there's a homeschool baseball league, and they're so good they beat a lot of the private schools.
Wow, that's exciting.
They beat some of the bigger private schools in the community.
Well, as it moves towards September, if you have time, maybe you could come back and let us know how it's progressing toward.
Yeah, I could maybe after September. I mean, we just don't know, but we're hoping it's going to be 15 or 20%.
Yeah.
Only time will tell. And it depends on, I'm doing what I can, but there are probably thousands of people on a small scale like me that are lobbying their neighbors and talking to people and trying to help them see it.
So it's up to the parents.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds great to me. So
thank you for having me.
It was really a privilege. And hold on, we'll say goodbye in the break here.
All right.
There goes retired Lieutenant Colonel Ray Moore, who I thought really great to have him agree to be on the show. And he's doing such good work trying to save all the kids from the public schools and needs to be supported. He's saying donations can be made at the Exodus Mandate site, exodusmandate.org, and publicschoolexit.com is full of information for parents that are thinking about homeschooling. And I think one of the most important points that he made out of many is that all those parents, and I've talked to many of them that think there's no way they can do it because they don't personally have time. They're working or they have other obligations. He's talking about the same thing actually came up as a problem for the early American settlers when they wanted to educate their kids. And they got together in a group and they hired a teacher that they trusted. And that one teacher often taught all the age groups and all the kids that needed to be taught in a one-room schoolhouse or a room of somebody's house. And that exact thing is working now. So information on that at publicschoolexit.com. And one thing that exodusmandate.org has is consulting for people that are thinking, well, maybe we actually could do it, but we have all these questions and we don't really know how, and we have no experience. And how can we find other people in our area that are doing the same thing? This is getting more and more urgent based on what is happening, in two areas. One is what the kids are being taught in public school is pretty disastrous. If you care about the lives of your kids, it's really, it's getting worse and worse. And the other is that physical things are being done to the kids in the name of public health without the parents' permission. And in many cases, encouraging the kids to not even tell the parents. And it's inconvenient to think about changing a routine that you've been doing for a long time, but if you become aware that it may actually endanger the life of your child to be where they could have some medical procedure done to them without the parents' knowledge or permission, it's worth trying to figure out a way that's feasible to get them into homeschooling. And it sounds like, unfortunately, I haven't had time yet to look at all the resources on publicschoolexit.com, but I will do that. And I'm going to be reading Ray's book, and I'll be able to tell you what I got out of that. And then, as we were talking about on the show, we'll have him back, and we'll get into the book in great detail. And you heard him say that the objective of his program is to see if they can get 25% of all the school children K through 12 in America into private school before September comes, which is the beginning of the next public school season. And as close as they can get to that or beat it, what he's trying to work toward is a tipping point where there's so many people that are doing homeschool that it actually changes to a more favorable, friendly government policy. I don't know what'll happen with that, because most of the people working in government have actually good motives, the ones that I know, but their bosses at the top their motives aren't so good. So, but their strategies do change according to how conscious the public is. So if Ray's objective is met or approximated, 25% of all of you guys with kids or friends or relatives that have kids out of public school by September into homeschooling, that could have a great effect on helping whatever country you live in. And he's talking about America, but part of the reason he is because each country, including America, is supposed to set an example for the other countries of the world. And the reason that expectation falls on America so much is that even though it's not taught in school anymore, in public school, the founding documents of the federal government of America as a country recognize that all of us have natural rights. Whatever country you live in, it doesn't change that at all. And that no policy or law of the government can take those away. And also no emergency, which is a really relevant issue right now. Because if it could affect your natural rights, then all a tyrannical government would have to do is just say, well, we really appreciate your rights, but we just have to declare an emergency and we'll give your rights back as soon as we can. Don't worry about it. And the founders of America recognized that danger and how the people in power would use it. And they didn't put any provision for changing any rights, even if an emergency is real and everyone's dying from it. They still can't take your rights away. And that's true in every country, which is a really important point. It doesn't mean to go out and get yourself killed right away if you're in a government that doesn't exactly agree with that stuff, but to be aware that everybody's got the same rights and they have to be gotten back at some point as soon as possible. So that's what really a lot of this is about. Remember to go to the two websites, exodusmandate.org, publicschoolexit.com, and you can get his films, Escaping Common Core and Indoctrination Indoctrination is at indoctrinationmovie.com, and Escaping Common Core sounds like it would be gotten through exodusmandate.org. And we'll try to get something up on our homepage reminding people about the websites, because I think his work is really important. Anyway, share comments if you want to. We've got contact forms on lostartsradio.com. You might want to support us if you can to keep us on the air. And if possible, we'd like to get enough funds in to put our programs into action, starting a school and things like that. It's very expensive. And, we may at some point find a commercial that is not unethical, doesn't feel unethical to run. But for now, we're dependent on donations. So if you want us to be able to do those things and start the school sooner and all that, donate buttons are at lostartsradio.com, lostartsresearchinstitute.org, and subscribestar.com/lostartsradio. So this is our Sunday show. We have a Saturday show in the afternoon, evening on Saturdays. It's about current events. You might find that really interesting. That's at 4:30 Pacific and 7:30 Eastern U.S. time. archives of it are available. You can stay in touch with all that at lostartsradio.com. And a half an hour after the Saturday show ends, we have the private meeting that you can be part of if you want. And that's Planetary Healing Club for taking these things to a deeper level. And that's accessed at planetaryhealingclub.com. And it's all based on the idea that you can transform your own experience of life by working on yourself, your physical health, and your consciousness, and everything in between. And that a few people who actually do that, take it beyond the belief stage and do the work, could have a massive effect on healing the outside world. And that's pretty important right now. So join us if you want to. And bottom line is, as always, take good care of yourself. Become conscious, become aware of what you're thinking and feeling all the time so that you can make sure that it's not programmed and part of the hypnosis that's gone around the world right now. And keep your independence that way, and you can have a good effect on everybody else, even if you don't say anything. The fact that your thoughts are what you want them to be, you're not a hypnotized zombie, that really is very supportive to everybody else. There are strong bonds between all of us that are not visible, but they carry energy instantaneously. And you can do as much as you want with that. It gets to be pretty interesting. So join us sometime at planetaryhealingclub.com. Have a good rest of the weekend, a good week, and really appreciate your being with us and look forward to seeing you next time. Talk to you soon.